Hey my good friends, Sam Haymart for Test Driven TV. Today we're looking at the 2021 Subaru Crosstrek Sport, an all-new trim grade that offers more horsepower, more off-road capability, and some butch new looks. So we're going to take a good close look at it inside and out. We're going to take a drive out here in the desert, and I'm going to tell you what I really think. All right, my friends, before we get out on the test drive, let's talk about what we have, because this is an all-new trim grade for the 2021 Subaru Crosstrek, the Sport. And so what they've done is on all Crosstreks, they've redesigned the front fascia and there are new wheel designs across the board, but on the Sport, there are quite a few things that give it an off-road flair, an off-road style that's just bumped up from the standard Crosstrek. And looking first at the wheels, 17-inch wheel with a painted finish, a metallic sort of charcoal color. And as we zoom out from that, you can see that the fender flares on this are also unique. Just a little bit more edge, just a little bit more stank on them, if you will. A little bit more style to sort of punch it home in the aggressive direction. Looking at the front, there's a unique grille on the Sport that has that same metallic finish on it. And you might notice here, though, we do have halogen headlights and halogen fog lights. You have to go all the way up to the Limited now to get the LED headlights. That same finish, though, does extend to the mirrors, which starts to give us a theme as we zoom out and look around to the rear. The Subaru Crosstrek for 2021 also offers two new colors, the Horizon Blue Pearl, which I have right here, and also a very bright Plasma Yellow Pearl. From the rear three-quarter view, you can see that the 2021 Crosstrek looks virtually identical to every other Crosstrek out there since 2018. Here you can see a little bit more detail on these unique wheel arches, and at the rear deck lid, the yellow Sport emblem, and that's really the only identifying mark other than the things we've already talked about, and that color yellow is something we're going to see a lot more of on the interior. The interior of the Crosstrek Sport is really where you start to see the differences by stepping into this trim grade, and it has everything to do with the trim and the upholstery and the accents. As you look around the dash, you see a lot of yellow stitching that goes across the dash, up in the top, down on the console, the shift boot, the door panels, it's everywhere. And look at these seats. This is a new material called Startex. It's vinyl and a little bit of a polyester, I think, but it is water repellent, as they say, and it's got a two-tone gray with the nice yellow accent stitching and Crosstrek embroidered into the backs. I think they're very handsome, and the material seems to be very breathable as I sat here both in cool and warm days in the Phoenix winter. I think it's a great look. The steering wheel itself has yellow stitching also, and the plasma yellow piece of accent trim, which is the same color you're going to find on the Sport emblem on the back of the car. Looking forward through the steering wheel, you can also see another area of difference with the Sport trim. This is a premium instrument cluster for the Crosstrek, and it has rings in the center, if you look closely, that are also that plasma yellow. Once we get past all those differences, though, some of the areas that start to show the age of the Crosstrek start to come to the front. This big binnacle up at the top, that is really sort of a throwback to the 90s. There's a digital clock and a few other readouts up there, but it really dates back to an era about 2 decades ago. The instrument cluster, also a very traditional simple instrument cluster, 2 mechanical dials and a very small screen in the center that's digital. A lot of cars in this price range right now currently have full digital instrument clusters. And as I look at the center stack, very simply laid out. In fact, they've managed to whittle this down to very little switchgear. This does have climate control on this particular trim grade. A little storage area down here that works pretty good for your phone. USB ports and auxiliary port down there. The shifter for the continuously variable transmission is here, and on the center console you've got the heated seat switches as well as the X mode switch, which we'll get to on the test drive. Cup holders down in the center, a nice spot for those out of the way, and storage. This lifts up and gives you access to a storage area that's about the size of a small square Kleenex box, not that big. Rear seat comfort is actually pretty good. The seating height at a pretty nice level for, well, what feels like comfort to me. My knees aren't perched up too badly and it feels very natural. These seats are set for my height, about 5'8", 5'9", depending on boots or shoes, and I've got plenty of legroom, as you can see. And with the trim that comes in the Sport trim grade here, it's gray, it's a nice light and airy look. I am surprised though that at around $30,000 I don't have vents in the back like some of the competitors offer, nor do I have any charging ports directly available to me without getting into the console. Also missing back here, surprisingly, is a fold-down armrest. There's nothing there. But as you would expect, these seats do fold down in a 60-40 split, offering a reasonably flat load floor. This one has the big rubber weatherproof mat in the back. That's very cool. And the other thing that's very cool is underneath that mat, being that this vehicle is really sort of marketed and dialed in as an off-roader, you do have a spare tire back there, not a fix-a-flat kit. That's very important in a vehicle that you're going to take out in the Rocky Wild like we're about to do. When it comes to rating this interior, I'm very happy with the visual upgrades that the Sport trim grade offers. I really think it looks nice, and I like this material on the seats, but very much like I found when I tested this in 2018, this interior really sort of dates back about 10, even 20 years in its overall design and its ethos. When it comes to creature comforts too, it tends to be lacking compared to some other cars in its class at this price. Things like digital instrument clusters, heated and ventilated seats, storage and connectivity options. It feels old. But nonetheless, I score this interior at 4 out of 5 stars. The infotainment system here is what Subaru calls Starlink. And it's a touchscreen just like any other, and one of the things I like about it is, in addition to all the menus and features that it does offer, I have a volume knob and a tuning knob, in addition to some hard controls here that make living with it very easy. As you go around and you use these various menu choices, I find that the graphics are very good and it reacts well to your touch. The audio quality isn't too bad either. The one thing I will complain about is the visibility. Because there's a big clear plastic screen without any shrouding like the one up there on the top, there tends to be a lot of glare in the sun. Almost any time of the day you've got reflections off of it, and you really have to fight to see it, especially at dusk. The thing is that at $30,000, it's missing a number of features like native navigation, a full 360-degree camera, and a few other things that I tend to expect for this price range in a lot of competitors. This infotainment system gets 4 out of 5 stars. All right, time to go for a drive. The big news for the Sport is the fact that this has a larger engine. This year now available in the Sport and in the Limited 2.5-liter Boxer engine. It's just a larger version of the 2-liter engine found in the base level models. So the question I always like to ask is, how does it go? And 60. Not too bad. This extra power, some 30 horsepower afforded by the new 2.5-liter engine, now 182 horsepower, 176 pound-feet of torque, is very noticeable over the standard 2-liter engine. And that's really something that I had talked about in my previous drives of the Crosstrek, was a little bit of a lack of horsepower. And so this really fills the bill, I think. And so if you're looking for something with a little bit more horsepower, this new engine's really going to make you happy, I think. And while you might think that affects fuel economy, it really just doesn't that much. This is rated at 27 city, 34 highway, and 29 MPG combined. That's only one less combined MPG, and actually on the highway it's one more. And that's because this is a larger engine and doesn't have to work as hard as the smaller one to keep it going through the wind at speed. One thing that is different about a Boxer engine is that it does have a very mechanical sound, something a little different than most cars with an inline-4. Now, Subaru files would find that endearing. I call it noisy, but I digress. This is an engine that has a lot of fans, and it does work very well for Subaru. It always has. That's why they still have them. I rate this powertrain at 4 out of 5 stars. On the topic of ride and handling, I find that the Crosstrek, as before, is very stiffly sprung. It's got a nice solid ride in town, and it has pretty good reflexes. The steering is pretty light, and the ride is generally quiet, particularly on the highway. Because it is stiffly sprung, it tends to be pretty responsive at handling when you throw it into a curve or when you're turning corners. But the question I really have is, how does it drive off the pavement? The Desert Washboard Road is a place that I normally reserve for trucks and SUVs, but Subaru markets this to me as a small compact crossover SUV, and with all of its off-road cred and off-road hype, well, this is a place to start wringing it out a little bit, seeing how it fares. And what I'm finding, just like previous Crosstreks I've test driven, is that while it handles very quietly, very stably, and very predictably on the pavement, when you bring it out on the washboard road, this rhythmic surface really causes a lot of resonance, causes a lot of rattling in the chassis, and it's actually pretty pronounced in this particular vehicle. The bottom line is it's not quite as solid and buttoned down as its SUV image might suggest. It's not to say that it's not capable out here, it's just to say that all of this rattling and vibration and the harshness I'm getting from this ribbed surface is just making this car feel a little bit like a POS. It's not to say it is one, it just feels and sounds like one. Stepping up to the Sport in the Crosstrek gives you an expanded X mode that's got some additional settings, and that really just sort of helps lock this four-wheel drive system down a little more and help give you a little more traction when you're going into some challenging situations. That can be snow, it can be mud, it can be sand. It might even simply be just a situation where you have very little traction for certain wheels. Like here, I'm high centered, and so I'm going to turn this on. And even though this isn't necessarily a locking mechanism, it enables the traction control to dial in a little bit more traction control. But I do find that with the extra ground clearance this really does have an amazing capability for a car-based crossover. And with the X mode in the CVT, I've got hill descent control built in, so I can crawl down this hill in a controlled manner, and I'm not even using the brake. It's just taking care of that automatically. Out on a trail a little bit rougher than the washboard road, I find that the ride is well controlled and it's pretty maneuverable getting through a lot of these tight corners. Although, like when I was out there on the washboard road, sometimes I feel some rattling in the front suspension, like maybe one of the bushings or the ball joints isn't quite solid or tight, but I do find that it gets harsh pretty quick. Not quite as badly as the Limited I tested a few years ago that had smaller sidewalls because of its 18-inch wheels. Having the smaller wheels on this does lend it a little more, well, let's just say fluency for off-roading, a nicer, quieter ride, but it does still remind you that this is not a true SUV. This is a car with a car-based chassis, albeit lifted. So taking into account the entire handling experience, I rate the chassis at 4 out of 5 stars. The last thing I like to talk about is value, and that's where I sort of look at how this compares to the competitors out there and put a score on it. And honestly, it's a little bit hard to do that with the Crosstrek because there really aren't that many direct competitors. You know, if you're looking apples to apples, there aren't that many other apples in the bin, right? Jeep and some of their products, they're more SUVs and upright. You get into like a Honda HR-V, right around the same size, kind of the same scope, but a lot less vehicle and not really geared toward off-roading. This new Sport is really the most off-road capable that I've seen with the Crosstrek, and it has the most power with the new engine. It offers a lot of things that there aren't too many competitors that are going directly to it have. So really the only things I can talk about here and not getting 5 stars are things like the quality, and that came into play in the chassis, some of the noise and the harshness, and also in features. And that really gets more to the interior and the fact that this thing's a little bit dated when it comes to some of the interior designs, some of the feature content we have in there, not quite up to what some of the other competitors are offering in a lot of their trim grades. So still though, value comes in at a pretty good 4 out of 5 stars. When you put that in with everything we've already talked about in this review, we're at a total score of 4 out of 5 stars. Very good. If you like the video you just saw, I invite you to see more of ours. Subscribe to our YouTube channel right down there. And if you want to learn more about the new 2.5 liter engine, click right there and see an in-depth video from our partner channel, TDTV Garage. Either way, stay tuned.